Hello YouTube, I'm Andrew Does Hair. You could find my work on Instagram at Andrew Does Hair. If you were to do so, you would see that my work is in fact hair. However, my work with hair often involves work with a camera. And it's for this purpose that I sometimes like to talk about camera gear. Now, about a year ago, roughly exactly a year ago, everything for me changed when I bought the Canon 5D Classic. After shooting with that camera for a year as just like a daily carry, something I followed around my kids with and something I brought to the salon, something I just used for everything, I started to find the low light performance was lacking. It was really horrible at tracking subjects. And so I was kind of bummed that I wanted that camera to just work for everything, and it kind of didn't. And then I started thinking about the Canon 6D, which is funny because I've owned about 10 of them in the last decade, but I never thought about them. And that's kind of what I want to rant about here. This is going to be a lengthy rant about the Canon 6D, the original, not the Mark II. I know nothing about the 6D Mark II. The Canon 6D came back on my radar after, man, even in the last 2 years, I've possessed 4, maybe 5 of them, and I'd never thought to own one for myself until very, very recently. It almost reminds me of the movies you see where the guy wants to go after the flashy, pretty person, and all along the girl next door, who was his best friend, ended up being the answer. That's kind of how I feel about this camera. For the last 10 years, the Canon 6D has been there for me, and it's worked. For the last 10 years, I mean, there have been, I could say countless, but about 10 times where the answer was, just buy a Canon 6D. And it never dawned on me that this was maybe the love of my life after all. And it took me going through all the wrong cameras and trying all these different things and thinking I needed specs and thinking I needed, mirrorless this and that and dual pixel autofocus this, and I needed a flippy screen, and I needed all the blah 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 C-Log and high resolution. And then it all just brought me right back to the Canon 6D. So again, in this video, this is a lengthy rant about the Canon 6D. I have 0 bullet points. I didn't even think about this video before recording it. Let's rewind back to the beginning for me. My first camera ever was a Canon T5, and I bought it from Best Buy. It was a Rebel kit, like most people would buy from Best Buy 10, 12 years ago. When I bought the camera, all I knew is like, hey, I got a nice camera. It was like $500 or $600 at Best Buy. It's going to take better pictures for me. So after a few months of trying to use it and not getting better pictures, I thought, well, I need to buy the better camera. So I walked into a real camera store and I said, what's your top of the line? They said the 5D Mark III. What are you shooting? And when I told them, mostly I want to do portraits of haircuts for Instagram, they said, oh, you don't want the 5D Mark III, you want the 6D. And, being that I had just this much grasp of the exposure triangle, I knew for a fact that the only thing my pictures were lacking was the best equipment, because I had just learned the exposure triangle. So I bought the 5D Mark III, and even in the store that day, feeling the 6D, it felt a little bit smaller next to the 5D. The buttons didn't have the same like big cushy responsiveness to them. They felt a little bit cheaper, like they didn't depress quite as far when I was pressing the buttons on the 6D, and it just felt cheap to me. But it was probably, now thinking back, it was 100% just being set on I want the more expensive cool one, and so therefore the 6D just is not good enough. Fast forward about 2 years of me shooting with the Canon 5D Mark III. A friend of mine who owned the 6D, I forgot how it came up, but he had brought it to a gathering, and like we were hanging out and having coffee and taking pictures of stuff. And I was like, well, let me see your camera. And I got a few pictures with his 6D, and I remember right away going, oh, this looks exactly like my 5D. Like the images that came out of it were just as good. And I realized with this simple little autofocus system, for shooting pictures of people standing in a room saying cheese after they get a haircut, I might have bought too much camera. But no, I'll push it to the back of my head. I still bought the better camera. And I tried to forget about the 6D again. So fast forward another couple of years, and I want to say this was maybe, I don't know, 5 years after I initially turned down the 6D. So we're looking at maybe it was 2016, 2017. I wanted to record a series of haircut videos that I was going to sell on some online courses, like behind a paywall. And what I learned from my little bit of dabbling with video, because I'm not a video guy, but what I learned from dabbling with video with the 5D Mark III was, well, a few things. One, it doesn't matter how cool your 5D Mark III or your A7 whatever, blah, blah, blah is. However cool your camera is, it can only be in one place at one time. And what I learned while recording haircuts is if I cut off hair and I, for whatever reason, missed the shot, I can't put that hair back on and reshoot it. And so I started thinking, I need like 5 angles on this thing. I want to get an angle from each side of the haircut. And so I started thinking, how can I get like good quality video that will match? Like I didn't want to do a lot of I was very, very brand new to video. I'm still very brand new to video, but I didn't want to have to match colors. So I was like, what if I just buy the exact same camera multiple times, but it has like that big grand professional full frame look to it. And then like the 6D ended up being the answer. I found a wedding photographer who was trying to sell two 6Ds, and I said, would you trade me straight up for a 5D Mark III? And he's like, yeah, absolutely. So I got these two 6Ds in exchange for my 5D Mark III. And then I went on Craigslist and I just kept looking for the most beat up, junky 6Ds that I could find. I ended up buying two more of these bodies for, I think, $400 to $500 a piece. And mind you, this was, the camera was only 5 or 6 years old at the time. So these had a lot of wear on them. I ended up checking the shutter count, and each of these four cameras had over 300,000. Like, I found the bottom of the barrel, most beat up, old, crusty 6Ds I could. And I didn't worry about the shutter life because, well, I was doing video with them anyways. And the whole point was I was just going to do a couple haircut videos, like a long-term project with these cameras. And then I was going to sell them off again. And so I was going to buy them cheap, use them for one project, and sell them cheap. Now, the projects, they ended up working out. And I think they looked great. Now, mind you, I'm not a video guy. I never had any other, C100 or anything to try to compare the footage to. But again, another theme with the 6D is when I recorded this footage, and mind you, I was by myself manning 3 or 4 cameras at a time. I would have one in my hands with a stabilized like 70 to 200. I'd have a wide shot, wide-ish, 35 or 50 on sticks that I was kind of watching over here. And then next to that, I'd have an 85 over here on a slider with like a pan head. And so I would be, every time the chair would move and the haircut would move, I knew that this wide shot was always going to be in focus. And then I would take the 85 and I would readjust it. And then I would like go back. And so point being, I was manning 3 to 4 of these cameras at a time. Sometimes I had one up on a C-stand overhead. And the footage though came out perfectly acceptable. I was very, very happy with the footage. I ended up recording, I probably produced, 20 to 30 hours of haircut instructional videos with a dozen of the best haircutters in the world. Like, we would collaborate on these things, and the cameras just worked. They just did their job. But I still never fully respected the 6D. I was just like, oh, it was good enough. It filled in the gap when I needed the gap filled. So I got rid of those 6Ds. I think that was 4 that I had owned at that point. And then, fast forward, I started around 2020, I started dabbling with the Canon mirrorless thing because I was like, oh, well, this is the way of the future. It's supposed to be better in every way. And so I owned the RP, and I didn't click with it very well. And then I owned the EOS R, and I really didn't click with that. Like, it just, something about it didn't feel very intuitive. And really what it ended up being, it was a lot of menu dives, and it was a lot of looking at screens to adjust things. And I didn't like that. I like a very tactile experience to where I can control the camera without looking at it because it's like muscle memory. And so I ended up, after borrowing the R5 and liking a lot of the functionality but not needing the resolution, I bought an R6, and that was like my main camera for 2 years, 3 years almost now. And then last year I did the whole 5D thing. So during that process that I was personally owning all of these full frame mirrorless Canon cameras and not loving them, the guy that owns my salon, he actually owns 4 locations. He came to me and he said, hey, I want to do something cool for all the stylists, and I want to just buy like a salon camera to just keep in the salon that anybody can pick up and use whenever they want. Something nice that'll take great portraits, but simple at the same time and not expensive because I have to buy 4 of them. And I was like, I got you, fam. And so basically what I ended up doing over the course of a year is I would buy a 6D on eBay for $400 or less. I got most of these recent ones for around $300, $350. I would buy a 6D, I'd buy an EF 85mm f1.8, I'd slap them together, and I'd set up a custom shooting mode in basically aperture priority with automatic ISO, and I'd hand it to my salon owner. I go, there you go, that's $700, and you're gonna get professional looking portraits out of it, and anybody who doesn't even know how to use a camera can pick it up, point and shoot, and it's just gonna work. And so now he's got each of his salons decked out with one of these, and so every time I bought one of those 6Ds to hand off to him, I was like, well, I got it in my possession. I'll just play with it for a few days. And every time I played with it, I was like, man, I forgot. These colors look really good. Man, I forgot. This camera's really simple. And in its simplicity, it's very fun to use. And then by the time I was really immersed in using the 5D Classic and very much just having a great time shooting JPEGs out of that thing. During that time, when I was temporarily owning these 6Ds, I noticed that even though the autofocus system looks identical, like if you look through the viewfinder, it looks like the 5D Classic. It is not identical. It actually works like really well, like very fast and very accurate. It's very simple, but it's very effective. This camera, in low light, it focuses, especially that center point, just beautifully, as good as any modern camera. Furthermore, going back to low light, at some point, I don't know, in the last 2 years, I volunteered to shoot a friend's event. It was a concert basically. And my main camera that I had on me was my Canon R6. I had a wider lens on there. I think I was bouncing between 35 and 50. But then on the left side, I was carrying a 6D, one of these ones that I owned temporarily. I was just like, well, I have it on me. I'll just have a second camera. So I threw a Sigma 105 f1.4 on there. And throughout the night, what I found is every time I picked up the R6, it was like boring. It was like I might as well, shooting with the R6 to me feels like pulling out my iPhone to get the shot. That's just what that camera feels like to me. But every time I picked up the 6D, what I recall is like it felt really good. It had that nice tactile feel that I like. It felt very like real, and I felt very connected to the experience of it, which was very similar to what I love about my 5D Classic. But I would never bring my 5D Classic to a concert because it's just not going to get the shot. It's not going to focus in low light, and then the shot's not going to come out. But with this 6D, what I found, I didn't realize it even in the moment, but it was like a few days later, I was thinking back and I was like, that 6D did not slow me down shooting a concert. I didn't have to wait for it to focus. I didn't have to wait for it to hunt. And in fact, that whole night I was shooting with auto ISO, and I never once thought about the low light performance. I never thought about the ISO going too high and not being usable. I was like, dude, this thing is a low light beast. Furthermore, most of the images that I got out of that camera that night, I was shooting JPEG, and for the most part, the colors out of the camera are wonderful. I would say not as magical as the 5D Classic, but definitely, I think now that I've shot with the 6D more often, I did a video a while ago where I compared the Canon 6D to the Canon R6, and in that video I said, oh, well, the image quality is about the same. I take that back. The Canon 6D has like very pretty stylized colors. And the Canon R6, by comparison, I feel like overall tends to be a little flatter. Let me boil it down this way. When I take a whole bunch of pictures of my kids playing at a fun thing or whatever, and I bring the R6, if I pull those JPEGs and I put them on a Dropbox file and I send them to everybody who was at the party, my wife actually, she's not a photographer, but she'll be looking through the photos I took and she goes, oh my gosh, like, can I edit these? Do you mind? And I'm like, yeah, I don't care. And then she'll get mad and go, why is the kid's skin the same color as the dirt and the same color? Like she'll have complaints about the way the images look. And mind you, she is not a photographer. But when I shoot with the 5D Classic or the 6D original, I don't get any complaints about the colors. It comes right out of camera, just good already. And so the whole thing about like, oh, Canon has magic colors, they just look better than everybody. I think they lost that. I would have to say I have no interest now. Like the Canon R8 came out and I'm like, I don't even care about modern Canon. Like these days I'm like, dude, I want 2005 to 2012 Canon. That was where the magic was. Like I got to go buy I want to get a 1D Mark IV or 1DX or something from that era now because I'm very curious about it. I actually recently, I bought a Canon 40D for $40, and so I like to joke that the 40D stands for $40. I bought one for $40 to give as a Christmas gift, and before I gave it to the recipient of this gift, I tested it. I used it for a few days, and I was like, holy crud, this is the best $40 ever spent. I actually just ordered another one for myself, and I'm going to do a video about it after I have it for a time. In fact, that video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this $40 Canon 40D along with a $35 used Yongnuo 50mm lens, and I'm going to do a video about like what kind of portraits can you get for under $100. Back to the 6D. When I got this 6D that I'm recording on right now, the probably 10th one that I've had in my possession over the last 10 years, this time when it came to me, it felt different. I was like, this is mine. I bought this one for me. I got it for $300 on eBay, and it's basically new. It's like new condition. And what it feels like now after using the 5D for a year, I feel like what people must have felt like back in the day when these cameras were new, because going from the 5D to the 6D, it feels so good and so like technologically advanced compared to the 5D. And so the 5D became my normal. It became what I was used to in a camera. And then when I switched to this 6D, I'm like, whoa, it can see in the dark. It can focus in the dark. It's amazing. What the camera does today, like if you would ask, is a 6D good enough today in 2024? It was way good when it came out in 2012, and it hasn't gotten any worse. And so like it was good enough back then, And if you're still doing what you were doing back then, it'll be good enough forever. It kind of reminds me of like in like 2006 or 2007, I had a computer that I was using to run Pro Tools. And I never did anything else with that computer. I just did music with it. And I remember at one point, like, realizing, well, one day I'm going to have to upgrade this. And a friend of mine was like, dude, if all you ever do with it is run that same version of Pro Tools forever, you'll never need to upgrade it. You could have that thing for 30 years and just run the same Pro Tools on it. And so I ended up disconnecting it from the internet so it didn't ask to be upgraded or anything. But this camera is very much like that. Let's see, what other last things can I tack on here? It's a large camera. You know, people like, oh, I can't get a big old DSLR. I use little mirrorless cameras now. If you were to buy this big old DSLR and put on it like a 50mm f1.8 lens, it is not very big. And then if you want to go wider and you still want to keep things small, you can get like the Canon EF 28mm f1.8, which is barely, if any, bigger than the 50mm 1.8. Now you got a wide shot with a very shallow depth of field for, oh, it's like a standard wide, but with a nice shallow depth of field. And the size of that setup is surprisingly very, very small. So yeah, the size, like, don't let it intimidate you. It's like we think that in the last, whatever, 15 years since this camera came out, that cameras have gotten so much smaller. And yeah, like in some cases they have, but you know, if you want small, just use your phone. I'm kind of in a little bit of a honeymoon phase with this camera right now. And so if you were to ask me, like, who is this camera for? At this moment, I feel like it's for everybody. But no, if I'm really thinking about it, if you want to learn photography, and by that I mean like learn the exposure triangle and learn all the settings and stuff, a camera like this is freaking wonderful. It's not like a menu heavy thing. It's got very simple menus. It's got a lot of like tactile buttons on it that are very simple and straightforward. And so everything that you need to control with this camera, you can do without looking at the screen. So yeah, I think this is a freaking phenomenal camera for learning. And then once you know the basics, this camera can kill with the right lens on it, can kill a phone still at certain things. Like, I would never vlog with this camera personally. I mean, I'll set it up in a room and stand across the room and I'll mark here to make sure I'm in focus still. But, you know, I wouldn't use it for vlogging. If I want to do video that's moving of any kind, like this lens, this camera's not stabilized, like keep it on a tripod if you're going to do video. So honestly, let me just back up and say, if you're doing video at all, don't buy this camera for video. Like this camera can do video, but don't buy it as a video camera. Not unless like you want to do things the old-fashioned way and manually focus and just manually dial every aspect in. This is not going to beat a phone. If you take someone who doesn't know what they're doing and you're like, here's this fancy camera, here's this phone, go do a video, the phone will look better 10 out of 10 times. And same thing with photos. If you just set this thing to auto and you just go take photos, it's not going to look any better than a phone. But if you want to learn photography and essentially figure out that little something that makes this picture look better than that picture and how to control all of that, that's what's going to make this look better than a phone. And this is an excellent platform to do that because, well, here's the scary thing. It's like, let's say you go buy whatever the modern camera is. You're like, I'm going to go buy, you know, the R8 seems sensible. It's $1,500. It's not the most expensive Canon there is, but it's not the cheapest either. It's just right in the middle. So you go get an R8 with a kit lens and you're 15 or 1,700 bucks into it. And then you go, hey, this is hard. There's a lot of menus. And, you know, ultimately at the end of the day, like I'm actually getting better photos out of my phone. Now you're out 1,500 to 1,700 bucks, and if you go sell that used, you're going to lose a lot of money on it. My R6, I bought it 3 years ago for 2,500 bucks. Today it's worth 1,300 bucks. Like, the value of cameras is, but not if you buy a 6D like this. You buy this thing for 300 bucks, you use it for 5 years, you sell it for 250 bucks. Like, this is an excellent, easy way to get into photography. And then once you figure out photography, this will stand up next to any modern camera. As far as the image quality, it's not going to match the same speed. It's not going to match the same kind of flexibility. If you're shooting action or something, or if you're trying to go like in extremely low light, like sure, maybe modern cameras can beat it. But as far as what the average person would need, this is absolutely a phenomenal camera. And I'm really, really ranting it right now. I apologize that I didn't come in here with bullet points or script or even a forethought or anything. I just came in here and was like, just bleh. Thanks for watching.